Welcome back to the 5280 pitch women's soccer at altitude. I'm Kate Hansen, and today we're talking about a player whose story stretches far beyond touchlines and tactics, a player whose presence in Denver isn't just about building a backline, it is about building a culture. Because when Denver Summit signed Carson Pickett, they didn't just add an experienced left back, they added history. They added perspective. They added someone who understands what it means to earn a space in a sport and in a world that doesn't always make room for you by default. Carson Pickett's journey into professional soccer didn't begin with guarantees. It began with questions. From the moment she was born with a limb difference, missing part of her left forearm, the world around her was quick to decide what she couldn't do. And yet, if you trace her career arc, what stands out isn't defiance for the sake of defiance. What stands out is persistence. It's adaptability. It is a refusal to let other people's limitations define her own ceiling. And that's why this signing matters for Denver. This club is brand new. It doesn't have decades of tradition to lean on. What it does have, though, is the chance to choose an identity from day one. And Carson Pickett embodies the kind of identity that resonates deeply in a city like this. Resilient, thoughtful, community-aware, and quietly elite. And from a footballing standpoint, Pickett arrives in Denver as one of the most accomplished fullbacks in the league. She is a two-time NWSL Best 11 selection, a former Defender of the Year finalist, a player who led the league in assists from defense in 2022 and finished near the top again in 2021. She won an NWSL championship and a shield with the Orlando Pride. She's over a decade into her professional soccer career. She's logged well over 100 NWSL appearances. And that resume alone would make her an anchor signing. But Carson Pickett has never been just a resume player. What makes her special and what makes her such a fascinating fit for Denver Summit is the way her personal story and her playing style mirror each other. On the field, she's an attacking left back who thrives on timing, anticipation, and creativity. She doesn't overpower opponents. She outthinks them. She finds space. She delivers service. She connects phases of the play. She understands that influence doesn't always come from the spotlight. And sometimes it comes from consistency, reliability, and the trust of your teammates. Off the field, that same mindset shows up in her advocacy. Pickett is the first player with a limb difference to earn a cap with the U.S. women's national team, a moment that mattered not just because of the jersey she wore, but because of who was watching. Young athletes with disabilities saw themselves reflected on the highest stage. Parents saw possibility. Coaches saw proof that talent isn't confined to a single physical template. And that matters in women's soccer, in a sport that has always been about expanding definitions of strength, of leadership, of excellence. And for Denver Summit, bringing in Carson Pickett is about more than filling the left side of the pitch. It is about setting a tone for what leadership looks like in this locker room. This is a team that is going to be young in places, still finding its voice, still learning how to handle expectation. Pickett brings calm. She brings standards. She brings the kind of lived experience that steadies a group when things get loud or uncertain. And think about the timing. Denver is building something from scratch, a fan base, a stadium, a culture. Carson Pickett joins at the ground floor. She gets to help define what this club values, how it engages in the community, how it carries itself when eyes are watching. Her presence sends a message that Summit FC isn't just chasing highlights. It is investing in people who understand responsibility. And as a fan, when I see this signing, I don't just see crosses whipped into the box or assists added to the stat sheet. I see a player who understands the weight of representation. A player who knows how to handle being seen, not as a novelty, but as a professional who belongs. And that's the thesis of this episode's sake. So Carson Pickett isn't just here to play left back. She is here to define what Denver Summit is going to stand for on the pitch, in the locker room, and in the broader women's soccer community. And once you understand that, everything else about her game starts to make even more sense. To really understand Carson Pickett, you have to slow down. You have to resist the urge to jump straight to the accolades, caps, or the assist numbers because her story doesn't unfold like a highlight reel. It unfolds like a long training session. Repetition, adjustment, frustration, resilience, and eventually mastery. Carson Pickett was born without part of her left forearm, and that fact is often introduced as a headline. But for her, it was just simply reality. It wasn't something she chose. It wasn't something she spent her childhood narrating. It was just the body she inhabited while trying to do the things she loved, including very early on, playing soccer. And here's the thing that matters. She wasn't shielded from the world. She wasn't protected from doubt. Coaches questioned whether she could throw the ball in. Opponents would underestimate her. And adults, often unintentionally, tried to reroute her ambitions towards something, quote unquote, more realistic. That's a familiar story with athletes with disabilities, especially in youth sports systems that are built around rigid assumptions of what an athlete should look like. But Carson Pickett didn't grow up trying to prove people wrong. She grew up trying to get better. And that distinction matters. In interviews over the years, she has been clear about this. Soccer was never about making a statement. It was about joy, competition, belonging. The advocacy came later once she realized how many people were watching and how meaningful visibility could be. But first came the grind. First came learning how to adapt, not to lower expectations, but to meet them in a different way. And that adaptability became a defining trait. When Pickett reached college soccer at Florida State, she wasn't a novelty. She was a serious player in a serious program. Florida State is not a place where sentimentality earns minutes. You perform or you sit, and Pickett performed. She learned to refine her positioning. She sharpened her decision-making. She leaned into what she did exceptionally well, reading the game, delivering quality service, connecting play, and she built a professional foundation that would carry her forward. The jump to the professional level is brutal for most players. And for someone like Pickett, it came with additional scrutiny. Every mistake risked being framed as proof of limitations rather than normal part of development. That's a psychological weight most athletes never have to carry. And yet, if you look at her career arc, what stands out, it isn't vitality, it's steadiness. And she moved through multiple NWSL environments, Seattle, North Carolina, Louisville, Orlando, different systems, different coaches, different expectations. And in each stop, she adapted. She learned, she became more complete, and gradually she emerged not just as a reliable starter, but as one of the league's most productive attacking fullbacks. By 2021 to 2022, that evolution was undeniable. Pickett wasn't just contributing, she was leading the league in assists from defense. And I want you to think about that for a moment. In a league filled with elite attackers, elite wingers, elite playmakers, it was a left back consistently creating chances at the highest level. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when a player understands timing, spacing, and trust. When teammates know that if they make the run, the ball will come. The moment that shifted her public profile permanently came when the U.S. women's national team gave her her first cap. She became the first player with a limb difference to play for the U.S. women's national team, and that sentence carries enormous weight, not because it defines her ability, but because of what it represents for others. And she's spoken openly about that moment, about realizing that representation isn't about being perfect. It's about being visible, about letting kids with disabilities see someone like them wearing the crest, standing on the field as the players they idolize. That's when Pickett leaned into advocacy, not as a branding stunt, but as a responsibility. She's very active with platforms like Voice in Sport She does a lot of public speaking. She's talked about inclusion, access, and the subtle ways that sport can either welcome or exclude. She's challenged coaches and organizations to rethink their assumptions. She's emphasized that disability doesn't look one way and that elite athletes come in many forms. And what's important here is that she's never positioned herself above the game. She positioned herself within it. She's been clear she wants to be judged as a soccer player first. Advocacy doesn't replace performance, it amplifies it. And that philosophy has changed and shaped how teammates talk about her. They don't describe her as an inspirational first. They describe her as dependable, intelligent, professional, the kind of teammate you want next to you in a tight match. That is the version of Carson Pickett the Denver Summit is getting. Now, I want to get into some of the numbers here because when you talk about Carson Pickett, the danger isn't underrating her, it's miscategorizing her. And once you put her in the wrong category, everything about her evaluation starts to wobble. So let's be very clear from the jump. Carson Pickett is not a generalist defender. She's not a defensive anchor. She's not a last-ditch stopper. She's not here to lead the league in tackles or blocks. Carson Pickett is an elite attacking fullback, and more specifically, she is one of the most productive chance-creating defenders the NWSL has seen over the last half decade. That's not an opinion. That is outcome. Instead of asking, is Carson Pickett a good defender, which is vague and unhelpful, the right question is, where does Carson Pickett rank among NWSL defenders at what she is actually asked to do? And when you frame it that way, the answer becomes much sharper because Carson Pickett ranks in the top tier of the NWSL fullbacks. And more specifically, she's the top 2 to 3 attacking left backs of the last 5 years. She's a top tier among defenders in chance creation. And she is historically elite assist production from a defensive position. That places her in a very narrow category, not a broad one. She is not interchangeable, which most defenders in this league, very few players do what she does at her level for as long as she has done it. In 2022, Carson Pickett led the entire NWSL in assists. I'm not talking about just defenders, not left backs, everyone. And that matters more than people are willing to say out loud because in 2021, she finished second in the league in assists and earned the best 11 honors. Across multiple seasons, she's consistently ranked near the top among defenders in chances created, crosses, final third passes, penalty area entries. This isn't a one-year spike. This is her profile. And here's a key point that too often gets missed. Very few defenders in league history have ever driven offense like this from wide areas. So when we talk about NWSL defenders who actively shape attacking identity, the list gets very short very quickly. If you're talking about prime Megan Killenberg in Portland, peak Kelly O'Hara as a hybrid wide playmaker, Emily Fox and systems that give her freedom. Carson Pickett belongs in that conversation. If you guys were paying attention, those are some very popular names that have been on the U.S. women's national team. Those are not a generic pool of solid veterans. Where she sits in the league hierarchy, I want to tier this properly because if you break down NWSL defenders into functional tiers, they look something like this. The tier 1A, those are the defensive anchors. Those are the players who value shutting things down, whose primary value is shutting things down. So think Naomi Girma, Becky Sauerbrunn at her peak. Center backs who tilt matches by denying space. That's tier 1A. Tier 1B, the two-way elite fullbacks, players who can both defend and attack at a high level, often with recovery speed as a defining trait. Then there's tier 1C. Those are elite attacking fullbacks. Players who attacking output fundamentally changes how a team plays. I believe that Carson Pickett sits squarely in that tier 1C, and she's lived there for years. And this is not a consolation tier. This is a specialization tier. And this is why it matters, because Tier 1C players are system defining. You don't plug them in, you build with them. What Carson Pickett does exceptionally well is tilt the field. Her positioning provides a reliable width in build-up, safe progression outlets under pressure, a consistent attacking lane on the left side. Statistically, she ranks high among defenders in progressive passive receives, which tells you something important. Teammates trust her. They look for her, and they know where she'll be. That trust allows teams to stretch opponents horizontally, sustain pressure, rest in possession, and that is gold for an expansion team. Denver Summit is going to spend its early seasons figuring out chemistry, spacing, rhythm. A fullback who can stabilize those phases without slowing play down is incredibly valuable. So Carson Pickett is one of the top attacking defenders in the NWSL, a historically elite assist producer from the left back, a Tier 1 specialist whose value lies in shaping how a team attacks. She's not a defensive anchor, and she's not meant to be. Denver Summit didn't sign her to win highlight battles. They signed her to define their left side, stabilize their build, and create chances from deep. And in a league where margins are thin and expansion teams rarely get time to grow quietly, that kind of player isn't just valuable. It is foundational. This is where everything comes together. The stats, her story, the reason this signing feels bigger than a name on a roster sheet, because Carson Pickett's arrival in Denver isn't just about solving a tactical problem at left back. It is about setting a tone for the locker room, for the fan base, and for what Denver Summit wants to represent from the very beginning. Expansion teams don't get many chances to define themselves early. Most are too busy surviving. Most are too busy just plugging holes, too busy reacting. But every once in a while, a club makes a signing that says, this is who we're going to be. Carson Pickett is that kind of signing. And for young players coming into this locker room, she represents professionalism without ego, a standard that doesn't need to be announced because it's lived every day. She's been in championship environments. She's seen what consistency looks like across long seasons. She understands how small habits compound into big outcomes. That presence is invaluable for a team still writing its first chapters. For fans, she represents something equally powerful: belonging. And Pickett's story matters because it expands the idea of who gets to be here, who gets to play, who gets to lead, who gets to be visible. Her advocacy isn't separate from her soccer career. It's woven into it. She didn't arrive at this level despite her difference. She arrived by mastering the game on her own terms. On the field, her impact will show up in very subtle ways that don't always make the highlight reels. The extra passes that break pressure, the early cross that changes defensive shape, the calm decision that steadies a match when chaos threatens. Over time, though, those moments accumulate. They become identity. Carson Pickett isn't a marketing signing. She isn't here to sell a story without substance. She's here because she raises the floor and the ceiling at the same time. She makes the team better in the locker room. She makes the locker room stronger. The club's values become clearer. So when you watch Denver play and you see that left side coming alive, when you see the attacks flow, the chances created, the teammates trusting the space, remember that it didn't happen by accident. It happened because the club chose intention over flash. And we're so lucky to have Carson Pickett. She's part of Denver now. With her comes experience, excellence, and a reminder that the strongest foundations are built by people who know how to adapt and how to lead. That's it for this episode of the 5280 Pitch. Be sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for caring. And as always, let's keep building this together.